They kicked out a black homeless man, then learned. He owns the entire building. The Silvercrest Hotel's grand lobby was filled with the scent of fresh-cut roses and the soft murmur of well-dressed guests enjoying their expensive drinks. The glass chandeliers above sparkled in the bright light, casting a warm glow over the lavish marble floors. It was the kind of place where the wealthy came to see and be seen, a sanctuary of luxury. That was until the doors to the lobby were flung open and the world outside came rushing in with the sound of a torrential downpour. A tall black man, drenched to the bone, stood at the entrance, his worn boots leaving wet footprints on the pristine floor. His tattered clothes hung loosely on his emaciated frame, and his face, weathered by the harshness of street life, bore the marks of years lived in the shadows. Yet his eyes held something else entirely. They were piercing, full of intensity, a deep knowledge of things unseen. The stark contrast between him and the glamorous surroundings was unmistakable. The guests, dressed in their finest attire, froze at the sight of him. The security guard stationed by the door, a young man with a sharp, professional appearance, immediately tensed. His hand moved toward his radio, prepared for the confrontation that was bound to happen. He was ready for this. The well-dressed guests nearest to the entrance stepped back, some frowning in disgust, others whispering behind their hands. It was as if someone had opened a door to a world they preferred to pretend didn't exist, a world they didn't want to acknowledge. The homeless man, unfazed by the stares or murmurs, strode forward with surprising dignity, his burlap sack slung over his shoulder. The old sack seemed to hold something precious, something worth more than what the eyes could see. He walked calmly toward the front desk where the receptionist, a young woman with platinum blonde hair and a forced smile, stood frozen, unsure of how to proceed. "Excuse me, sir," she called out, her voice shaky, attempting to remain polite. "You can't be in here." The man didn't flinch. He continued his slow stride through the lobby, scanning the room as if searching for something, or someone. The hotel manager, Mr. Langley, a man in his 50s with sharp features and a tailored suit, emerged from his office, having heard the commotion. His face was already set in a look of disdain, as if he already knew who was causing the disruption. "Is there a problem here?" Mr. Langley asked, though his tone already conveyed his indifference to the answer. The man turned to face him. His voice was deep, calm, and unwavering as he spoke. "No problem," he said simply, locking eyes with Langley. "I'm just here to claim what's mine." There was a beat of silence. Mr. Langley's eyebrows shot up in confusion. "I beg your pardon," he said with an incredulous laugh. "This hotel," the man continued, his gaze fixed firmly on Langley. "It belongs to me." The room fell silent, the laughter from the surrounding guests dying instantly. A few seconds passed before Langley broke the silence, laughter spilling from him. "Well, that's certainly a new approach," Langley scoffed, his voice dripping with mockery. "Usually the homeless just ask for spare change, not the entire building." The man didn't flinch. His eyes remained steady, unwavering, locked onto Langley's face. Langley waved his hand dismissively. "Security!" he called out to the receptionist, who quickly picked up the phone. Within moments, a burly security guard named Bradley appeared. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a military haircut, his uniform tight across his chest. Bradley approached the man, giving him an almost dismissive look. "What seems to be the issue here?" Bradley asked, his voice thick with disdain. "This gentleman," Langley said with exaggerated politeness, "believes he owns the Silvercrest. Would you kindly show him out?" Bradley stepped forward, his hand resting on the man's arm, attempting to push him out of the lobby. "Come on, old-timer," Bradley sneered. "We don't do handouts here." The man didn't resist, but didn't move either. Instead, he reached into his old sack, causing Bradley to tense. Was this man reaching for a weapon? But instead of pulling out something dangerous, the man pulled out a piece of aged paper, yellowed with age, its edges frayed. "Check your records," the man said calmly, holding out the paper. "My name is Elijah Carter," he continued, the weight of his words sinking in. "This hotel stands on land that belongs to me." Langley's eyes widened as he snatched the paper from Elijah's hand. He glanced at it briefly before bursting into laughter again, louder this time, for everyone to hear. "You must be joking," he announced. "A man like you could never own a place like this." The guests around the lobby murmured their agreement, some shaking their heads in disbelief, while others looked on with utter disdain. It was impossible. A black, homeless man, claiming ownership of one of the most prestigious hotels in the city? But not everyone in the room was so easily convinced. A young receptionist named Amanda Williams stood to the side, watching the scene unfold with increasing unease. There was something about the old man's demeanor, something that didn't match the usual scammers or the mentally ill seeking shelter. Elijah wasn't acting like someone with nothing to lose. He had the presence of a man with a purpose. Bradley tightened his grip on Elijah's arm. "Let's go, buddy," he said gruffly. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." They began to drag him toward the door, but Elijah didn't struggle. Instead, he walked with calm determination, as though this moment, this encounter, had been a long time coming. Before they could push him out of the door, Elijah stopped and turned back toward the lobby, his eyes locking with Langley's one final time. "You laughed," Elijah said, his voice carrying despite the rain now falling outside. "You won't be laughing for long." With that, they shoved him out into the rain, the heavy downpour soaking him through as he stumbled to the wet pavement. His sack, still clutched tightly to his chest, tumbled beside him. The guard stood in the doorway, watching to make sure he didn't try to come back. One of them laughed, and they both turned, heading back inside, leaving Elijah behind in the storm. Elijah slowly rose to his feet, gathering his belongings, and glanced up at the towering hotel. The building that he had once helped to build, the building that now stood as a symbol of everything he had lost. Yet there was no defeat in his eyes, only the certainty that this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. Before walking away, Elijah locked eyes with Langley once more, who stood smugly in the doorway, unaware of the storm that was about to hit them all. "You laughed," Elijah repeated, his voice steady, "but you won't be laughing for long." As he walked away into the rain, a single truth burned in his mind. They had stolen everything from him, but now he was coming back to take it all back. The secret revealed. The rain poured down relentlessly, soaking the streets of the city as Elijah walked with purpose, his figure cloaked in a sense of calm resolve. His worn boots splashed through puddles, the rhythmic sound of his steps the only thing that could be heard above the howling storm. Every drop of water seemed to mirror the heaviness in his heart, but there was also a flicker of hope, a fire that burned brighter with every step he took away from the Silver Crest Hotel. His mind was focused, not on the mockery he had endured inside the hotel, but on something far greater. He had been mocked, thrown out like a discarded piece of trash, but what they didn't know, what Langley and the others didn't realize, was that they had just woken a storm that was about to hit them hard. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Elijah wasn't a man broken by the streets or the injustices he had suffered. No, he was someone who had learned the value of patience, someone who had survived the worst life had thrown at him, including 15 years in prison on false charges and 30 years spent wandering the streets he was now poised to reclaim. His first stop was a small coffee shop on the corner, a quiet place where he could gather his thoughts and make the calls that would change everything. As he stepped inside, the warmth hit him like a wave, contrasting with the chill of the rain that clung to his clothes. The barista behind the counter gave him a quick glance, but he didn't seem to care. Elijah had gotten used to the judgment of others. What mattered now was what he was going to do next. Sitting at a table by the window, Elijah pulled out the yellow document that had caused such a stir in the hotel lobby. His name was clearly printed on the deed to the land, the one that had been stolen from him decades ago. He knew the truth now, and it was only a matter of time before the rest of the world did too. He pulled out his phone, his fingers trembling slightly, as he dialed the first number on his contact list, Amanda Williams. She had been the only one to believe him, the only one who had looked past his weathered appearance and seen the man he truly was. He had no doubt she would help him, but there was a part of him that feared what might happen if she did. The phone rang 3 times before Amanda's voice came through. "Elijah, are you okay?" "I'm fine," Elijah replied, his voice steady. "I need your help." There was a pause on the other end. "What's going on? I saw what happened at the hotel. What did Langley say to you?" "Elijah," Amanda said, her voice taking on a serious tone. "I know what you're trying to do. But you need to be careful. Langley and the Kavanaughs, they'll stop at nothing to protect their secrets." "I know," Elijah said, "but they don't realize who they're dealing with. They think I'm just some homeless man, but I'm not. I'm the one who owns that building. I have the proof." Amanda was silent for a moment. Elijah could practically hear the wheels turning in her head as she processed the information. Finally, she spoke. "What do you need from me?" "I need you to help me get the rest of the records. There's something else I need to show the world, something that will expose everything. I need to meet you, Amanda. I need your help to make this right." Elijah hung up the phone and stared out the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. It wasn't just the Silvercrest Hotel he was trying to reclaim. It was his life, his dignity, his very soul. He had been robbed of so much, and now it was time for him to take back what was rightfully his. The next day, Amanda met Elijah at a small diner just outside the city. She had brought a stack of old records with her, some of which she had retrieved from the hotel's archives. She had been digging just as Elijah had asked, and now she was ready to reveal the truth. "I found it," Amanda said, sliding a folder across the table to him. "There are discrepancies in the hotel's ownership records. I've tracked the history of the land back to the 1970s, and your name, your father's name, is right there in the records. They erased you from the history, Elijah. But it's all here, in black and white." Elijah opened the folder and scanned the pages. His heart raced as he read the documents, each one confirming what he had known all along. The Kavanaugh family had stolen everything from him. They had erased him from the world's memory and tried to bury the truth with lies and manipulation. But the truth had a way of resurfacing, and Elijah was here to make sure it did. "This is it," Elijah said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is how we bring them down." Amanda nodded. "We're going to need more than just these records. We need to get the Kavanaughs to admit what they've done." "I know where we can find the evidence," Elijah said, his eyes burning with intensity. "But we'll have to act quickly. The longer we wait, the more they'll try to cover their tracks." The next few days were a blur of preparation and planning. Elijah and Amanda knew that they had to move fast. They couldn't let the Kavanaughs have time to silence them. Elijah's old connections, some of whom he had kept in touch with during his time on the streets, were coming through for him. They had access to the legal documents that would tie the Kavanaughs to the corruption, to the stolen land, and to the crimes they had committed. But as the days passed, something strange began to happen. Elijah's old friends started disappearing. They stopped answering their phones, and some of them had even been followed. Elijah knew that the Kavanaughs were getting nervous. They had to be. On the evening of the anniversary gala, when the Kavanaughs would be at their most vulnerable, Elijah and Amanda made their move. They had arranged to meet in a quiet corner of the Silvercrest's underground parking lot, where they would meet up with the last person who could help them expose the Kavanaughs once and for all. But as Elijah and Amanda walked toward the parking lot, they noticed something was wrong. There were cars parked in unusual places, and the sounds of distant voices echoed through the darkened corridors. They had walked right into a trap. Amanda turned to Elijah. "We've been set up, haven't we?" Elijah nodded, his face grim. "They knew we'd try to expose them." "They've been watching us this whole time." But it was too late. The Kavanaughs had already made their move. They had sent their men to take care of Elijah and Amanda, and they weren't going to let anyone stand in their way. Elijah grabbed Amanda's arm. "Run!" he shouted. They sprinted down the hallway, their footsteps echoing through the empty hotel. Behind them, they could hear the sound of boots pounding on the marble floor. Elijah's heart raced as he pulled Amanda through a side door and into the alley behind the hotel. They had to get to the car, had to get out of there before it was too late. But just as they reached the car, a figure stepped out of the shadows. It was Langley. "You really thought you could get away with this?" Langley sneered, a smirk crossing his face. "You've made a grave mistake, Elijah. This is where it all ends." But Elijah wasn't done. He had waited too long for this moment, and he wasn't going to let Langley or anyone else stand in his way. "You'll regret underestimating me," Elijah said, his voice steady as he reached into his pocket and pulled out the one thing that would change everything: the deed to the land. The deed that would expose the Kavanaughs once and for all. "Take a good look at this," Elijah said, holding the deed high for Langley to see. "This hotel, it belongs to me, and I'm not going anywhere." The shock on Langley's face was priceless. He stumbled back, his eyes wide with disbelief. He had been part of the conspiracy all along, but now the truth was out. The Kavanaughs had no power over Elijah anymore, and this time there was no turning back. As the sound of approaching sirens grew louder in the distance, Elijah knew that the battle was just beginning. But for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of hope. It wasn't just about taking back what was his. It was about making sure that the truth, the real truth, was finally heard. And nothing would stop him now. The walls close in. Elijah felt the weight of the night settle on him as he paced through the alley behind the Silvercrest Hotel. The sound of the storm still clattered against the pavement, a constant reminder that he was in the middle of something far bigger than he'd ever anticipated. The deed to the hotel, the document that once seemed like a distant relic of a life he'd lost, now burned in his pocket. He had come here to claim what was his. But with every passing minute, he could feel the walls closing in. He was no longer just Elijah Carter, the man they had erased from history. Now he was a threat, and the Kavanaughs would stop at nothing to silence him. He glanced at Amanda, who had been unusually quiet since the confrontation with Langley. Her eyes, usually filled with resolve, now carried the weight of uncertainty. She had seen it all: the mockery, the disbelief, and the swift brutality of the Kavanaugh's men. But even she knew, deep down, that this was just the beginning. "Are you all right?" Elijah asked, his voice soft but firm. Amanda looked up at him, her brow furrowed in thought. "I'm fine. I just didn't expect them to go this far. They've already tried to bury your past. Now, they'll do whatever it takes to bury the truth." Elijah gave a grim smile. "I've spent 30 years watching them do just that. But they're about to learn something." He paused, his face hardening. "They underestimated me." As they made their way toward a safer location, a modest apartment just a few blocks away, Elijah's mind raced. The Kavanaugh's empire of lies was beginning to unravel. But the deeper they dug, the more dangerous the fight became. He had to move quickly, but even faster than he anticipated. The Kavanaughs wouldn't wait. They were preparing for retaliation, and the last thing Elijah needed was for this to escalate any further. When they arrived at the small, dimly lit apartment, Elijah didn't waste any time. He pulled out the old folder filled with documents and placed it on the table. Amanda sat across from him, looking down at the papers that could bring the entire Kavanaugh family down. "This is everything," Amanda said, her fingers brushing over the edges of the yellow documents. "This proves they stole the hotel from you." Elijah nodded, but there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. "They've got a lot of power, Amanda. They've had decades to cover their tracks. This," he pointed to the papers, "could be the tip of the iceberg. But what if it's not enough?" She shook her head. "No, Elijah, this is it, the ledger. The original deed. We have all the evidence we need to expose them." Before Elijah could respond, a sudden knock at the door startled them both. Elijah tensed, his instincts kicking in. He motioned for Amanda to stay quiet as he crept toward the door, his hand moving to the pocket where he had concealed his phone and the document. Amanda held her breath as Elijah peered through the peephole. His expression darkened. It was Carl, the janitor who had once worked for the Kavanaughs. He had been a crucial ally, someone who had witnessed the shady dealings of the family for years. "Carl," Elijah whispered as he opened the door, relieved to see the familiar face. Carl looked over his shoulder nervously before stepping inside. "We need to talk, and fast." Amanda's pulse quickened. She could tell that Carl wasn't just here to check in. He was delivering news, and she didn't think it would be good news. "What's going on, Carl?" Elijah asked, his voice calm but sharp. Carl glanced around before speaking in a low tone. "It's worse than we thought. They've found out about the documents. Langley, he's been talking. The Kavanaughs are mobilizing. They know you're out there, Elijah. They know you're coming for them." A heavy silence filled the room. Amanda's heart raced. "What does that mean? Are they coming for us?" Carl nodded. "They've already sent people to your old apartment. It's just a matter of time before they realize you're not hiding out there anymore." Elijah's jaw clenched. He knew the Kavanaughs wouldn't wait. They would try to silence him, and this time it wasn't just about the hotel. It was about erasing him completely. "We can't keep running," Amanda said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. "We have to go public. We have to get this information out there now. The more people who know the truth, the less likely they'll be able to do anything about it." Elijah considered her words. The truth was their weapon, and if they could expose the Kavanaughs on a larger scale, it would be harder for them to control the narrative. The only problem was that the Kavanaughs had every resource at their disposal, and they were willing to use it. "All right," Elijah said, standing up and gathering the documents. "We need to get this to someone who can make it go viral. We can't do this alone. We need a platform, someone with influence. But we have to be careful. They're watching." Carl nodded. "I've got a few people I can call. But we need to act quickly. If we wait too long, they'll catch up to us." Amanda opened her laptop and began typing furiously. "I know someone. I've been in contact with a journalist, Frank Banks. He's been trying to expose the Kavanaughs for years. If anyone can help us, it's him." Carl's eyes widened slightly. "Banks? The investigative journalist." "He's big time, Amanda. If you're sure about him, then we have to move fast." Elijah placed his hand on the table, steadying himself. "We have no choice. We move tomorrow. We give Banks everything. Everything. And then we make sure they don't stop us." That night, the city was alive with whispers of the Silver Crest scandal. But Elijah and Amanda had a bigger plan. As they settled into their temporary safe house, they knew the Kavanaughs were only one step behind them. They had to move quickly, but Elijah couldn't help but feel a flicker of satisfaction. For the first time in years, he was on the offensive. And the Kavanaughs were about to learn just how powerful the truth could be. The tension in the room was palpable as they prepared for their next move. Elijah and Amanda knew that this was their chance to strike at the heart of the Kavanaugh empire. If they failed now, the consequences could be fatal. But if they succeeded, it would be a victory not just for Elijah, but for every person the Kavanaughs had exploited and silenced over the years. As they sat in silence, preparing their next steps, Elijah couldn't shake the thought of what was coming. His mind was focused, but his heart weighed heavy with the knowledge that the battle ahead would not be easy. The Kavanaughs had too much power, but Elijah had something they didn't. He had the truth. And in the end, that might just be enough to topple their empire. The silent war. The morning had come too quickly for Elijah. He hadn't slept well the night before. Despite the brief sense of satisfaction from finally having a plan, he could still feel the Kavanaugh's shadow lurking behind every corner. His mind raced as he got dressed, his hands shaking slightly as he tied his shoes. Each step he took felt heavy, as if the weight of the world was resting on his shoulders. Amanda, on the other hand, was already up and about, her eyes tired but determined. She sat at the table, scrolling through her phone. The glow from the screen illuminated her face, casting a pale light on her tired features. The truth was out there, and they had a chance, finally, a chance to fight back. But even as she felt the surge of hope, the unease in her stomach told her that the worst was yet to come. "Ready?" Elijah asked, his voice hoarse but firm. Amanda nodded, her fingers tapping nervously on the edge of her phone. "As ready as we'll ever be." The plan was set. They would meet Frank Banks in a secure location to hand over all the documents. The Kavanaughs would be watching, but they had no choice. It was the only way to get the truth into the public eye. Still, Elijah couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He had known the Kavanaughs for too long. Nothing was ever as it seemed with them. As they walked out of the apartment, Amanda was deep in thought. "I've been thinking about what Diego said," she began, breaking the silence. "About Carl. If he's involved, what if this whole thing has been a trap from the start?" Elijah's pace slowed, and he turned to her. "I trust Carl. He's been with me for years. He didn't have to help us, but he did. He's not like them." His voice was steady, but there was a hint of doubt creeping in. He had been burned before, and this situation felt no different. The Kavanaughs had a way of turning even the most trusted allies into enemies, but Amanda wasn't convinced. "I hope you're right," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because if he's not, we'll be walking right into their hands." They took a cab to the meeting location, their eyes scanning the surroundings every few seconds. They couldn't afford to be caught. Not now, not when they were so close. The Kavanaughs would be ready for them, and they had to act fast. They couldn't trust anyone. Not even Carl, despite his past loyalty. Not even Frank Banks, who had been chasing the Kavanaughs' dirty secrets for years. When they arrived at the old warehouse, the atmosphere was tense. The fog had settled over the area, obscuring the streetlights and casting an eerie glow on the desolate parking lot. There were no signs of life, no one waiting. Just silence. And that, Elijah knew, was the first red flag. They stepped out of the cab and approached the building cautiously, their footsteps echoing in the empty space. Amanda's hand tightened around her phone, and she glanced at Elijah. "This doesn't feel right." "I know," Elijah said, his voice low. He kept his eyes on the shadows, on the corners of the warehouse. "Stay close." As they reached the entrance, a car pulled up in the distance, the headlights cutting through the mist. Elijah's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't the car they had been expecting. Frank Banks wasn't supposed to be this late. They weren't supposed to be here alone. "This is it," Amanda whispered, her breath visible in the cold air. "We need to go inside now." Before they could reach the door, the sound of footsteps behind them made them freeze. Elijah spun around, his body tensing. The figures approaching were too familiar, too coordinated. It wasn't just one man, it was a whole team. The Kavanaugh's security. "Don't even think about it," a voice rang out from the shadows. It was one of the security guards, a man Elijah recognized from previous encounters. "You're not going anywhere." Amanda's pulse quickened. "What is this? A trap?" Elijah didn't answer. His instincts kicked in, and he immediately pushed Amanda behind him, stepping forward to face the armed men. "You're not taking us." "Step aside, old man," another guard sneered, his hand moving to the gun holstered at his side. Before Elijah could react, he heard a sharp crackling noise. It was a distraction, a perfect distraction. One of the guards suddenly collapsed, his body hitting the ground with a dull thud. Then a figure emerged from the shadows. A familiar figure. "Carl," Elijah muttered, his voice filled with disbelief. Carl stood there, his face grim, holding a tranquilizer gun. "You didn't think I'd let you do this alone, did you?" But even Carl's unexpected arrival didn't seem to slow down the chaos. The guards, now shaken, reached for their weapons, but Elijah wasn't waiting. He grabbed Amanda's arm, pulling her into the warehouse's dimly lit entrance. "Move!" Elijah shouted. "Get inside, now!" They ran, their footsteps pounding against the floor as they sprinted deeper into the warehouse. Behind them, Carl fought off the guards, holding them off long enough to give Elijah and Amanda a head start. But even Carl couldn't hold them back forever. The Kavanaugh's men were too many, and their goal was clear: silence Elijah before the truth could escape. They found an old office in the back of the warehouse, one that looked like it had been abandoned for years. It was a perfect hiding spot, but Elijah knew it wouldn't be enough for long. He could hear the guards closing in. Amanda fumbled for her phone, but before she could unlock it, Elijah grabbed it from her hands. "No time," he said, his voice urgent. "We need to finish this now." Amanda looked at him, confusion on her face. "Finish what?" "We're trapped here." Elijah's gaze turned to the desk in the corner of the room. "Not yet," he said. "We have a card to play." "But it's a long shot." Without another word, Elijah moved toward the desk, searching through the drawers until his fingers brushed against something cold, metallic. He pulled out a flash drive. Amanda's eyes widened. "You've been planning this?" she asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. "Always have a backup," Elijah replied, his voice steady as he plugged the drive into his phone. A few seconds later, he found what he was looking for. "Oh, this is our leverage." A loud crash echoed from the hallway, followed by frantic footsteps. They were close, too close. Amanda's mind raced as she glanced at the screen of Elijah's phone. The file was labeled Kavanaugh Secrets. "What is it?" she asked. "Proof," Elijah said, his voice sharp. "Proof that the Kavanaughs orchestrated everything. The fraud. The lies. My imprisonment. This flash drive holds it all." Before Amanda could respond, the door to the office burst open and Elijah grabbed her, pulling her into the shadows. The guards stormed in, weapons drawn, searching for any sign of them. "Where are they?" one of the guards barked. "Find them now." Elijah and Amanda stayed as still as possible, their hearts pounding in unison. The tension in the air was suffocating, but the footsteps finally began to fade. The guards had moved on. "Now," Elijah whispered. "We upload this to every major outlet." Amanda nodded, her hands trembling as she took the phone from him. But before she could hit send, the phone vibrated, signaling a new message. A message from an unknown number. "You can run, but you can't hide. You won't be safe for long." Amanda's stomach dropped. It was a threat. And it was only the beginning. As the message lingered in her mind, Amanda knew one thing for certain. The game had just begun. The truth was out, but the Kavanaughs were not going to give up without a fight. And Elijah had no intention of backing down. This was his fight now. The dark web of lies. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows of the small office where Elijah and Amanda stood, their breath shallow as they stared at the glowing screen of Elijah's phone. The Kavanaugh family empire, which had once seemed invincible, was now crumbling beneath the weight of the truth they had exposed. Yet, despite the victory of uncovering the evidence, they were far from safe. The storm that brewed outside mirrored the turmoil inside, the threats, the lies, and the unknowns that still lurked in the shadows. Amanda sat at the desk, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. The file on the phone was labeled Kavanaugh Secrets, and it contained everything they needed to bring the family down. Every fraudulent transaction. Every manipulation. Every dark secret buried beneath layers of wealth and influence. She knew it was only a matter of time before the Kavanaughs retaliated. They were powerful, dangerous, and ruthless. They wouldn't go down without a fight. Elijah paced the room, his mind racing. He had spent years on the streets, years in prison, but nothing had prepared him for this. For the storm of rage that was about to be unleashed. He could feel it in his bones. The Kavanaughs wouldn't just let this slide. They'd fight back with everything they had. But for the first time in decades, Elijah felt something else stirring inside him. Something fierce. Determination. Revenge. And a sense of justice that had long been denied to him. "The file's uploaded," Amanda said, breaking the silence. Her voice was steady, but Elijah could hear the undercurrent of nervous energy in her tone. She was just as aware as he was that this was only the beginning. "Good," Elijah said, his voice low, almost predatory. "Now we wait. Let the world see who the Kavanaughs really are." Just as he finished speaking, Amanda's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her expression immediately shifting to one of concern. She held it out to him, her face pale. "It's from Diego," she said, her voice tight. "He's in trouble." Elijah snatched the phone from her hand, reading the message quickly. "They know we're on to them. I've been followed. Be careful. They're coming for all of us." A chill ran down Elijah's spine. The Kavanaughs had made their move. He'd been expecting retaliation. But this was more than just a threat. It was a warning. A warning that they were closing in on him, on them, and there was no escaping this now. "They're already here," Elijah muttered, his eyes narrowing. "We need to move." Amanda stood, her eyes wide with fear. "What do we do?" "We go to the docks," Elijah said, his voice decisive. "Diego's out there. And if he's being followed, we need to get him before they do." The urgency in his voice spurred Amanda into action. She grabbed her bag, shoving her phone and the flash drive with the Kavanaugh secrets inside. They had no time to waste. The city had always been a maze of shadows, but tonight the shadows felt different, more oppressive, more dangerous. As they stepped out into the cold night, Elijah couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The streets were eerily quiet as they made their way toward the docks. Elijah's steps were quick and purposeful, but Amanda had to keep pace with him, her mind spinning with 1,000 thoughts. How had the Kavanaughs found out? Was there a leak? Or had Diego really been followed? The questions tumbled through her mind, but there was no time to dwell on them. The storm was coming, and they had to be ready. As they neared the dock area, the cold air seemed to thicken around them. The sound of waves crashing against the piers was drowned out by the distant hum of traffic and the occasional blaring horn of a car. The quiet was unsettling, and Amanda couldn't help but feel the weight of their situation bearing down on her. They were exposed, vulnerable, and the Kavanaughs had a long reach. "Elijah, we're being followed," she whispered, her eyes darting around the darkened alleyways and the deserted streets. "I can feel it." Elijah didn't look back. "Keep moving. Stay close." They slipped into an alley between two warehouses, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The air felt thick, and every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Elijah's hand instinctively reached for the gun hidden beneath his jacket, his grip tight around the handle. The years of survival on the streets had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now, his instincts told him they were in grave danger. As they turned a corner, a car's headlights flickered in the distance. The glow of the headlights illuminated a figure standing in the shadows, Diego. He was alive, but barely. His clothes were torn, his face bruised and battered. He stumbled toward them, his steps shaky. "Elijah," Diego croaked, his voice hoarse. "They're coming." "They know." Elijah's heart raced as he saw the fear in Diego's eyes. Who knows?" he demanded, his voice tight with urgency. "They're Kavanaugh's men," Diego gasped, clutching his side. "They've been tracking me for days. They've been watching everything." "They know about you, about the ledger, and they won't stop until they get it back." Elijah's blood ran cold. The Kavanaughs had made their move, and they were hunting him down. But there was no turning back now. The truth had already been exposed, and Elijah wasn't going to let them take it from him. "Get up," Elijah commanded, pulling Diego to his feet. "We don't have time. We need to move." They hurried through the alley, but as they reached the end, the sound of car engines revving cut through the night. A black SUV came barreling down the street, its headlights cutting through the fog like a predator tracking its prey. Elijah's heart skipped a beat. They were trapped. "Get in the warehouse!" Elijah shouted. "Now!" They scrambled inside the nearest building, the heavy doors slamming shut behind them. The interior was dark and musty, filled with crates and broken equipment. But it was the only place they could hide. Elijah and Amanda pressed themselves against the wall, their breath shallow as they waited. The sound of footsteps echoed outside, growing louder as the Kavanaugh's men approached. Elijah's hand tightened around his gun. He wasn't about to let them take him again, not after everything he had fought for. The door to the warehouse creaked open, and a voice called out, "We know you're in there, Elijah." "You can't hide forever." Amanda's heart raced as the voice rang out in the dark. She knew they couldn't wait much longer. It was now or never. "Elijah," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What do we do?" He didn't answer immediately. His mind was racing, his plan forming in the silence. The Kavanaugh's men were getting closer, but Elijah wasn't about to let them win. "We make them come to us," he said, his voice calm but deadly. And with that, Elijah and Amanda prepared for the final confrontation with the Kavanaughs. The storm outside may have been fierce, but the storm within the warehouse was about to explode. The unraveling. The warehouse smelled of dust and rot, the air thick with tension. Elijah, Amanda, and Diego crouched behind crates, barely daring to breathe as the sound of footsteps grew louder. The Kavanaugh's men were closing in. The plan was simple. Stay hidden, wait for the right moment, and strike. But nothing ever goes as planned when you're up against people with the kind of power the Kavanaughs wield. Diego's breathing was shallow, and Elijah could see the fear in his eyes. The young man had been through too much already, and now here they were, backed into a corner, with nowhere to go but forward. "They'll find us," Diego whispered, his voice tight with panic. Not if we don't let them, Elijah replied, his voice low but firm. He could feel the weight of the gun in his hand, the familiar cold steel offering a semblance of control in an otherwise uncontrollable situation. He wasn't the same man he had been years ago, and he had no intention of letting anyone erase him again. Amanda's eyes flicked nervously between the shadows of the warehouse and the crates they were hiding behind. She had never been in a situation like this before, never been the one fighting back, never been in the line of fire. But she wasn't about to back down now. Not when they were this close to the truth. "I don't think they're going to let us walk away this time," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They won't," Elijah said, his gaze fixed on the doorway. "But that doesn't mean we're not going to make them regret it." The footsteps grew louder, closer. He could almost feel the men's presence, their arrogance, an arrogance that had been bred by years of unchecked power. Elijah had seen it before, time and time again, the way the rich and powerful thought they were untouchable, above reproach. But tonight, that was all going to change. The door to the warehouse creaked open, and a flash of light poured into the darkened space. A man's silhouette appeared in the doorway. His voice was cold and commanding. "Elijah Carter," the man called out, his tone mocking. "We know you're in there. Come on out." Elijah's grip on the gun tightened, but he didn't move. He wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of thinking they had control. He knew what they wanted. He could feel it in the air. They wanted him to break, to show fear. They wanted him to cower before them, like they thought every other black man had before. But Elijah wasn't that man. Amanda's hand subtly brushed against Elijah's, a silent show of support. He nodded once, signaling her to stay back. He wasn't going to let them take her too. From the shadows, Elijah watched as two more men entered the warehouse, followed by the unmistakable figure of James Wilson, the head of security. His sharp eyes scanned the darkened room, searching for any sign of movement. He had been there when the Kavanaughs had first tried to silence Elijah all those years ago, and now he was back, more determined than ever to see the job through. "Elijah!" Wilson barked, his voice full of disgust. "We know you've been digging into things you shouldn't. But you're not getting away with it this time. You should have stayed out of it, old man." The words stung, but they didn't reach Elijah. He wasn't an old man. He wasn't some feeble pawn in their game. He had survived too much to be crushed by a few more words. "You'll never understand, will you, Wilson?" Elijah's voice cut through the tension, steady and calm. "You think this is about you, about me, but it's not. It's about everything you've stolen from people who could never fight back. It's about every lie you've spun, every innocent person you've crushed under your boot. And it's about time someone made you pay for it." Wilson's eyes narrowed, and he stepped forward, his voice low with menace. "You think you're some kind of hero. You're just a washed-up old man who got lucky. You don't belong here, Carter. You never did. This city, it was never yours, and it's never going to be." Elijah's eyes met Wilson's, unwavering. He could feel the weight of the moment, the final confrontation coming. But there was no fear in his chest, only resolve. And the knowledge that it wasn't just about him anymore. It was about everyone who had been left behind, everyone who had been silenced. He was their voice now. Before Wilson could take another step, Elijah stood, moving quickly and quietly, his boots barely making a sound as he approached the men. The moment Wilson saw him, he lunged, but Elijah was faster, sidestepping and bringing the butt of the gun down against the side of his head. Wilson collapsed to the ground with a grunt, momentarily stunned. Amanda gasped but didn't make a sound. She knew this was Elijah's moment. She trusted him, as she had from the beginning. "Elijah," Diego called out, his voice full of urgency. "We need to move." More are coming. Elijah nodded, his gaze still fixed on the fallen security guard. This is only the beginning, but we're not finished yet. He turned to Amanda, who was already moving, pulling Diego toward the back exit of the warehouse. They had to get out before reinforcements arrived. Just as they reached the door, the sound of more footsteps echoed from behind. This time it wasn't just the Kavanaugh's men, it was the police, their sirens wailing in the distance. The game was up. They had no more time to waste. "Elijah, we need to go," Amanda urged, her voice filled with panic. "Now!" But Elijah didn't move. Instead, he turned back, looking at the warehouse one last time. He knew they had exposed enough to bring the Kavanaughs down, but there was still one final thing left to do. "They can chase me down all they want," Elijah said, his voice steady, "but they'll never catch me." With that, he followed Amanda and Diego out the door into the night. They couldn't afford to stop now, not until the truth was finally laid bare for the whole world to see. The city was their battleground, and the war wasn't over yet. As they disappeared into the night, Elijah's thoughts were clear. The Kavanaughs had stolen his legacy, his family, and his freedom. But what they hadn't stolen, what they could never steal, was his soul. And now, it was time for him to take it all back. The journey was far from over, but one thing was certain. Elijah Carter was not done yet. The price of truth. The cold wind whipped through the dark alley as Elijah, Amanda, and Diego moved quickly, their footsteps echoing off the damp walls. Every corner seemed to hide a threat. Every shadow was a potential danger. The night was their only cover as they made their way to the abandoned warehouse where they had last seen the Kavanaugh's men. "Why are we still running?" Diego asked, his voice breathless. "We have the evidence. The Kavanaughs can't just walk away from this." Elijah didn't answer immediately, his focus fixed on the path ahead. He was used to running, used to being hunted. But this time was different. This time, they weren't just running for their lives. They were running for justice. "It's not over yet, Diego," Elijah said finally. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, something fierce beneath the surface. "We've exposed their lies. But they still have power. They'll do anything to keep the truth from coming out." Amanda's mind raced. She had seen the look in Elijah's eyes. He wasn't just worried about the Kavanaugh's retaliation. He was worried about the system that allowed them to get away with it in the first place. "We need to finish this," Amanda said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. "We need to make sure they can't run anymore." Elijah stopped walking and turned to face them, his eyes intense in the dim light. "That's why we're going to make them pay, Amanda. We're not running from them. We're going to show them that the truth is unstoppable." Diego shot a glance at Elijah, then looked away, unsure of what to make of the man who had spent decades fighting a system designed to crush him. He had seen that fire in Elijah's eyes, heard the quiet resolve in his voice, but Diego couldn't help but wonder if it would be enough to bring down the Kavanaughs. The warehouse loomed ahead, its metal doors rusted with age and disuse. The place had been abandoned for years, but there were still signs of life. Faint sounds, the distant hum of movement in the shadows. "Stay close," Elijah said, his voice a low whisper, "and be ready." They entered through a back door, the creaking of the metal hinges sounding louder than they would have liked. Inside, the air was thick with dust, the dim light from the broken windows barely enough to see by. The warehouse was empty, save for a few crates and pieces of old machinery, but it felt like they were being watched. "I don't like this," Diego muttered under his breath. "It's too quiet." "We're not alone," Elijah replied, his eyes scanning the shadows. He was used to being hunted, but he had learned to use it to his advantage. The Kavanaughs might think they were in control, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. Amanda's phone buzzed in her pocket, breaking the silence. She fumbled for it, her heart racing as she checked the message. It was from an unknown number. "They know where you are. Get out now." Her blood ran cold. "They've found us," Amanda said, her voice shaking. "We need to move, now." Elijah's face hardened. "It's a trap. We don't run. We fight." He moved toward the far end of the warehouse, where a narrow staircase led up to a loft area. His steps were steady, purposeful, as though he knew exactly where he was going. Amanda and Diego followed, their footsteps quiet on the wooden floor. Elijah reached the top of the stairs first, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the room. It was empty, but something didn't feel right. He could feel the tension in the air, like a storm waiting to break. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed behind them. Amanda turned, her heart pounding in her chest. Two men appeared from the shadows, their faces hidden behind masks. One of them held a gun. "Elijah Carter," the man said, his voice mocking. "We've been waiting for you." Amanda stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fear building inside her. "You can't silence him anymore. The truth is already out. Everyone knows what you did." The man with the gun smirked. "You think you've won? You think this is over? You're just a couple of nobodies trying to play in a game that doesn't belong to you." Diego clenched his fists, but Elijah placed a hand on his shoulder, signaling him to stay calm. "You've been stealing from people for too long," Elijah said, his voice low but powerful. "It's time to pay for what you've done." The man with the gun laughed, but there was a nervous edge to it. "You don't scare us, Carter. You're nothing. Just a washed-up nobody with a pipe dream." But Elijah didn't flinch. He stood tall, his presence commanding the room. "I'm not the one you should be worried about. I'm just the beginning." Before the man could react, Elijah lunged forward, knocking the gun out of his hand and disarming him with swift precision. The other man hesitated, unsure of what to do next. He took a step back, his hand reaching for his own weapon. But it was too late. Amanda was already moving. She tackled the man to the ground, using the element of surprise to her advantage. Diego followed her lead, kicking the gun out of the other man's hand and pinning him to the ground. For a moment, everything was still. Then, the sound of sirens echoed in the distance. "We don't have much time," Elijah said, his voice urgent. "Get the evidence. Now." They moved quickly, gathering the documents and taking photos of the men they had subdued. It wasn't enough to just take them down. They needed the proof that would put an end to the Kavanaugh's empire for good. Amanda's phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Frank Banks. "It's all over the news. Kavanaugh's empire is crumbling. The feds are moving in." Amanda looked up at Elijah, her heart racing. "We did it," she said, her voice trembling with relief. But Elijah didn't smile. "It's not over yet," he said, his eyes focused on the door. "They'll come after us. We need to keep moving." Diego looked at him, uncertainty in his eyes. "What now?" "We finish this," Elijah said, his voice steady. "We make sure they can't run. We make sure they pay for everything they've done." The warehouse was silent once again, but this time it wasn't because of fear. It was because they had finally taken control. And this time, the Kavanaughs wouldn't be able to stop them. The final reckoning. The cold wind stung their faces as they stood just outside the warehouse, now a place of chaos and evidence of the Kavanaughs' web of deceit. Sirens wailed in the distance, echoing the victory they had fought for. But it wasn't over yet. The battle was just beginning. Elijah stood at the edge of the dock, his eyes fixed on the Silvercrest Hotel in the distance, its silhouette outlined against the darkening sky. The faint lights of the building seemed almost mocking to him now, a reminder of the years he had spent fighting for what was rightfully his and for the injustice his family and community had suffered at the hands of the Kavanaugh dynasty. "Amanda, Diego," Elijah began, his voice steady but filled with the weight of everything that had happened. "This isn't just about a hotel. This is about a system that's been built on lies, on stealing from people who never had a chance. This fight, it's bigger than just us." Amanda nodded, her hand trembling slightly as she held her phone, the images of the Kavanaugh documents and photos still fresh in her mind. "I know, but we've exposed the truth. The world will see what they did. And there's no turning back now." Diego, who had been silent for a while, finally spoke, his voice tight with emotion. "What do we do now? I mean, we've got the proof, but they're still dangerous. We can't just leave it up to the authorities." Elijah turned to him, a faint, knowing smile crossing his face. "It's already happening, Diego. The authorities are closing in. The Kavanaughs won't be able to escape this time." The three of them stood there for a moment, letting the weight of the moment settle. But there was no time to rest. The Kavanaughs were still a threat, and they had made it clear they would stop at nothing to keep their empire intact. Amanda's phone buzzed again, a message from an unknown number. She looked at it, and her heart sank. "They're coming for you. Be ready. And this time it's not just your lives they'll ruin." Her blood ran cold. "It's happening again," she said quietly. "They're not giving up. We have to finish this." Elijah looked at her, his eyes unwavering. "We will, but we need to be smart. The Kavanaughs are too powerful to take down directly. We'll make them fall, but we'll do it the right way." Just then, the sound of footsteps behind them broke the silence. It was Carl, panting and out of breath, his eyes wide with urgency. "We've got a problem," he said, his voice strained. "They're on to us. Jonathan's men are already mobilizing. They're coming for you now." Elijah cursed under his breath, but his expression remained calm. "We knew this was coming, but it's too late for them to stop us now." Carl glanced at Diego and Amanda, his face grim. "You might want to think about getting out of here. I'll stay behind and slow them down, but they'll be looking for all of you." Elijah didn't hesitate. "No, we stand together." "You've already done more than enough, Carl. But we finish this. All of us." Carl's face softened for a moment, but he nodded, understanding the resolve in Elijah's eyes. They had all been through too much to stop now. "All right," Carl said, "but you're on your own." "I'm not sticking around to get shot." They shared a brief moment of silence before Elijah looked at Amanda and Diego. "Let's go. We're headed for the Silver Crest." The tension was palpable as they moved swiftly through the back alleys and quiet streets, trying to stay out of sight. They knew the Kavanaugh's men were everywhere, hunting them down like prey. But they had one thing the Kavanaughs didn't: the truth. When they reached the hotel, the atmosphere was completely different. The once grand, gleaming building now felt like a prison, its walls closing in on them, and the truth they had uncovered felt like the only weapon they had left. As they entered through the back entrance, Elijah's heart beat faster. This wasn't just about the hotel anymore. This was about dismantling an entire system that had been built on injustice. They moved through the hallways, their steps light but purposeful. Elijah led the way, his experience on the streets making him the perfect guide. Amanda and Diego followed close behind, their minds racing with the knowledge that they were about to face their greatest challenge yet. When they reached Jonathan's office, the door was locked, but Elijah wasn't worried. With a few quick movements, he had the door open. The office was quiet, the once opulent space now a cold reminder of the empire that had been built on lies. "This is it," Elijah said, his voice steady. The final piece. They quickly searched the office, gathering anything that could be useful, documents, hidden files, anything that could take down Jonathan once and for all. But just as they were about to leave, the door creaked open. Jonathan stood there, his face twisted in anger. You think you've won, don't you? You think the truth will set you free? You're wrong. The Kavanaugh family will always find a way to rise. Amanda stepped forward, her voice unwavering. Your family built this empire on the backs of people like Elijah. You'll never escape it. Jonathan's eyes narrowed. You don't know what you're dealing with. I will make sure you all pay for this. But Elijah wasn't intimidated. You can't threaten the truth. The world knows now. And nothing can stop it. Just then, the sound of sirens filled the air. The authorities were closing in. Jonathan's expression faltered, and for the first time there was doubt in his eyes. No, this can't be happening, he muttered under his breath, but it was too late. The door burst open, and FBI agents rushed in, quickly securing Jonathan and his men. Elijah stood still, watching as the once mighty Kavanaugh empire crumbled before his eyes. Amanda looked at Elijah, a smile breaking across her face. We did it, she said softly. Elijah nodded, his eyes fixed on the chaos unfolding around them. No, we've done it. As the agents took Jonathan away, the weight of years of suffering, of injustice, seemed to finally lift from Elijah's shoulders. He was no longer the homeless man thrown out of the hotel. He was the man who had come back to reclaim what was rightfully his. And as they stepped outside, into the night air, the first real taste of freedom, they knew the battle was far from over. But for the first time in a long while, Elijah Carter smiled. Epilogue. The next morning, the Silver Crest Hotel was buzzing with excitement. News outlets from around the country were reporting on the downfall of the Kavanaughs, and Elijah Carter's name was at the center of it all. The hotel was no longer a symbol of corruption. It had become a symbol of justice, of perseverance, and of reclaiming what was stolen. Amanda stood beside Elijah, watching as the crowd gathered outside the hotel. The story of a homeless man who had owned it all along had become an inspiration to thousands. And for the first time in years, Elijah felt at peace. Do you regret it? Amanda asked, her voice soft. Elijah turned to her, a hint of a smile on his face. Not at all. It was worth every step. And with that, they walked together into the future, one where justice had finally been served, and a new chapter had begun. If you believe in justice, in fighting for what's right, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. More stories of redemption and perseverance are on the way. Stay tuned.